My talk is about the kibbutz, and as mentioned before, the kibbutz is considered, or for people who know it, they consider it, or they understand it as kind of the archetypical Zionist village. To begin, I would like to begin by stating one thing, that the kibbutz is not a village. It was not conceived as a village, as it's not considered a village from the early 1920s with the people who actually founded the kibbutz as a national movement. And what we have here is a statement, a manifesto from the founders of the first kibbutz in Israel, En Harod, established in the 1920s. And what they say is that our goal in our settlement is to live the life of a large society, a working society, which overcomes the artificial differentiation, harmful in both its human and its national economic aspects, between work in pure agriculture and work in artisanry and industry, keeping urban work and rural work separate. Our aspiration is a society that unites physical and mental work within itself. Our aspiration also entails our wish to create a cultural center in this settlement that will provide for its cultural needs, and in which the means dedicated to culture, adult education, and the education of children will be concentrated. And this manifesto is actually very, very important, and it is kind of a guideline for the history of the architecture of the kibbutz. And because what we see, and what is really very interesting and unknown for many, is that the kibbutz is a fully master-planned urban setting. What we see here is a plan from very early on, probably the 1930s or early 1940s, and we see the kibbutz as a garden suburb. Basically, it's the garden suburb model that. And it really looks like a kind of an urban neighborhood of the socialist era, and what it really constitutes is that the meaning of the kibbutz is an urban environment. But very early on, we see a shift, an evolution of the kibbutz into something like this. And the reason for the change from this kind of orthogonal urban plan into this more organic kind of continuous space is very interesting, and it relates to something that I would call kind of the extended domesticity of the kibbutz. We need to understand that physically and organizationally speaking, the kibbutz is a continuous space where no private property exists, where all the buildings were called, like there were termed rooms. We have a dining room, we have rooms for the members. The typical apartment at the beginning was 12 square meters for a member. It grew from that to 16, 24, etc. But it stayed very, very minimal. And most of the kibbutz itself, the whole kibbutz, was always fenced and gated. So it's a gated community. And the reason for that, for the gatedness of the kibbutz, is that the whole space, the whole what is called the residential camp, is an extended domestic space. So all the different daily chores, the different daily programs and functions that we usually used to have in our homes is spread out, distributed within the kibbutz, the space, and the outdoors and the indoors actually act as the social space of domestic life. So when the kibbutzim were much more intact, and I will get to that a little later. If you, as a foreigner, someone who's from the outside, would enter the kibbutz, immediately someone would approach you and ask, what are you doing there, or who do you belong to? And me, as I didn't grow up in the kibbutz, but I had a large family in the kibbutz, so I used to go there very often. And I remember this experience, trying to walk alone in the kibbutz as a kid, and someone would come, who do you belong to? What family are you from? Okay, and you really, and it was an experience. You felt really like you're entering someone else's house. And I would like to. I won't touch much about the architecture of the buildings in the kibbutzim, But the interesting things, and it relates a lot with the issue of routines, is this, that the kibbutz, the whole space, the whole settlement, is the background and the vessel for daily, weekly, and yearly routines. And when I say routines, these are really like very programmed and established institutional routines. For example, these meetings, we need to understand that the kibbutz was run as a direct democracy. We were talking a little bit earlier today. The talk was about the government and the sovereignty of the community. And it's interesting to note that in the kibbutzim, the sovereigns were the members. So the government had very little to do with what happened within the kibbutz. Even after the establishment of the State of Israel, they had their own education system, planning departments, zoning plans, etc. It was all internal. They really had nothing to do with state mechanisms. And we see the like daily routines. This is called the cinema alone in one of the kibbutzim. We can see maybe we can see the screen up here. So the kids are sitting in the cinema alone, or this scene, like the members are watching TV outside. Again, something that for many years members did not have TV sets in their rooms. They were not allowed to. There were large discussions about if a member can have a radio or even a teapot, because if he makes tea in his room, he won't go to the club where he's supposed to, in the ritual, in the routine, he's supposed to have the tea after, in the 5 o'clock after returning from the field or from the factory. The Passover meal, a very, very traditional Jewish routine. This is really like Thanksgiving in the States or something like that. But here again, the family is not the basic cell, but the whole kibbutz. So these are yearly routine. Every kibbutz developed its own Passover ritual, and we see a lot of what we call the Passover Agadah, the book or that we read in the Passover meal. And each kibbutz developed its own kind of hybrid between religion and socialist culture of its own. Or the weekly routine of the General Assembly. All the decisions were accepted in these assemblies. This is usually done in the dining hall. So the dining hall would dine three times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then over the week, there are all sorts of rituals happening in the dining hall. Again, the idea of the democratic, of the direct democracy. So everything that had to do with, from very individual decisions, like if someone goes to school or what school, if someone wants to study dance, and the kibbutz decides that he would be an engineer, then he would be an engineer. Otherwise, he has to leave. And my mother left the kibbutz because she wanted to be a dancer. And she was not allowed to be a dancer. All sorts of community gathering, concerts, music, everything happened together, or things like that. Saturday morning at the members club, everybody, people did not get the newspaper at their doorsteps, but they would go to the club and everybody sits and read the paper. This is kind of part of the social routine of every day. Or late nights, we need to remember one thing, another thing, that the kids did not grow up in their parents' houses. There were children houses, so the parents were exempt of finding babysitters in order to go out, and they had time actually to interact. So nighttime at the club is. This is part of the routine. This is where everything happened, and this is where the political lobbying before the assembly happened, and everything was really in these kind of nighttime meetings at the club. Now, in the 80s or the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s, with a political shift in Israel from a Labour Party dominated society, from a social democratic state, and the rise of right-wing, both politically and economically speaking, liberal ideas, the kibbutz have experienced a very, very steep decline in its appeal to people. And if this is the mythic image of the kibbutz, we can see, no cars or very little cars. Everything is pedestrian. No fences between people. So everything that is outside of the members' cell, the room, is totally public. Not public in the way that we think about it, but communal. It belongs to everyone, but to the extended family. So it's part of this extended domesticity. We start seeing this, and this is a current picture, of course. This kind of it's kind of a Oriental mech mansion, I would say. Yeah, okay, like it's a Orange County-like construction. We start seeing the private lot. We start seeing the single-family house or the semi-detached houses. This is actually new construction in Kibbutzim, and this is where we were, like let's say 5 to 8 years ago. This decline and the way that this kind of continuous space of the kibbutz, this really high quality communal space, started vanishing. And what we started experiencing in the last few years, and I'm thinking about it. I think a lot of it has to do with nostalgia. Is a few emerging models, which I would take a few seconds, just a few minutes. I need to drink something, sorry. So I would read something that I've written a few years ago, and as part of an exhibition that I curated in the Venice Biennale in 2010, about these new models, where 4 years later things have changed and things are happening. But the evolving thing, and the emerging models are what I would call a welfare community. With the abandoning of welfare systems and the disappearance of the welfare state. In Israel, it happened a little bit prior to what's happening in Europe, but in Europe it's happening, I think, in many countries these years. A few models, very interesting models, have started to appear. I would read. Concurrently with the processes of renewed special thinking, some fresh and original models of softened capitalism have evolved in Kibbutzim. Instead of a Thatcherist neoliberalism, models of safety nets and mutual aid among kibbutz members are being created. In these new models, the kibbutzim take upon themselves functions that the welfare state has discarded. A system of voluntary and progressive internal taxation enables the community to set up an internal welfare system that is more developed than that available to the country's general populace. A community subsidy maintains the informal education system, complements the income of members whose means are limited, pays medical benefits and pensions to ill and elderly members, and subsidizes food and other basic needs in accordance with values determined by each kibbutz. For architects, this is a most significant moment in which their inventiveness and originality are put to the test. Can there be a third way, a way that does not preserve the kibbutzim of the past as they were, and at the same time takes into account the radical changes being experienced by the renewed kibbutzim, and that on this background managed to preserve the basic qualities of the kibbutz space in its new role as a community welfare system? This reorganization seeks to create a space of social cohesion and solidarity, an essentially hybrid, multi-generational, multifunctional space, and to infuse new content into the many public and community buildings and the high-quality public spaces that remain in place in the kibbutzim without appropriate use. in approaching this task, we must remember the words of the architect Shmuel Bickles, one of the seminal architects who were responsible for the evolution of the Kibbutzim as we understand it today. And he wrote, "The way of life dresses the settlement in a formal form, and the form shapes the character of that life. Architects today are entrusted with the task of identifying the currents at work and of dressing them in a form that will shape the lives of those now returning to the kibbutz solely because of its unique features alone." So today there is a demographic boom, really like an influx of people returning to the kibbutzim or joining them. So people who lived in the kibbutz or were born in the kibbutz and left during the crisis years and now are returning. And they are returning mainly for nostalgic reasons, remembering how it was. And when they return, they usually get lots in these expansion neighborhoods, the suburban neighborhoods, and they really refuse or they really struggle for a renewed model, renewed thinking about architecture and planning of current residential projects that would somehow be integrated better in the existing space. And this is, as a practitioner, this is exactly the things that I'm very much involved to date. So this is one of these neighborhoods. We can't see much, but this is a neighborhood that was built as a suburban subdivision. Here at the center there was a road going on and secondary roads, and we're trying to replan these neighborhoods to actually be integrated in the space of the kibbutz in a much more kind of softer way. And the question is, of course, kind of returning to the quote of this older architect, if we do or replan these neighborhoods in somewhat similar to the way it used to be, would it really be a background for a renewed sense of community? As a believer in the power of design to really shape society and community, I believe that it can, but it still needs to be proved, I guess, as these places have not been built yet. But what is another thing that is emerging, sorry for the quality of this picture, another thing that concerning the urban routines issue, another thing that is happening in Israel, and this is a kind of accelerating very fast, is the idea of an urban kibbutz. So these are nucleus of starting from 20 individuals to 35, even sometimes less, very small nucleus of families. Many of them people who really believe in the social utopias of the kibbutz, but totally disillusioned by what happened to the kibbutz. And they actually build or settle in urban, in cities, usually in the periphery of Israel, as much as Israel has a periphery, being such a small place. And they actually re-establish the systems, the community systems and organization of the kibbutz, with one difference is that there is totally it doesn't have any production attached to it. There's no industry, no agriculture. But if they have an economy, it's an economy based on social activism and setting up educational systems and programs within the place where they choose to live. But the rest of the things is totally, it resembles very much the old kibbutz. And we see a Passover dining, or I'll get there later. Some of them actually build their own neighborhoods, so they get land from the municipality to actually build their own neighborhoods. And many of them are intentional communities, so they have, except of the social ideas, they have ideas about ecology, education, etc. Others were giving just these structures, public structures that were totally underutilized, like this huge 1970s building. This used to be what we call an immigration absorption center, where the state absorbed new immigrants in these facilities. This is where they learned Hebrew, etc. And from there, they were distributed to either public housing or to create their lives in the new country. And in these weird kind of big structures, very small groups of individuals set up their lives. This is the inside of one of these spaces of this huge project. So it's a living room, but it's a communal living room where people, they really kind of reconstitute the extended domesticity, but in an interior setting. And today there are a few groups, and I'm working with these groups in a few areas in Israel today. There are, just to mention, there are 120 such nucleus. So it's not a small phenomena. 120 such groups. This is the most established, the oldest one of them. It's called Tammuz, and they have their own residential complex in the city of Bet Shemesh, a city near Jerusalem. And this is a general assembly where I presented a new residential building. They have very, very little land. But it's interesting to note that most of the discussion with them, I've tried to really think what it means to build a residential building, not a spread out, but really kind of a building of 4-6 stories high, and a few apartments, just an apartment building block. What does it mean to do it in this kind of urban kibbutz setting, and what are the communal spaces within the building? And it's interesting that the discussion with the members of this group, all the time it went from the building itself to the surrounding area. So they still have this notion of the outside, the outdoors, as their extended communal spaces. So for them, the apartments and the apartment buildings should be just as neutral as possible. But the main discussion is how to design the landscape around them in order to enable them to do all their daily routines, daily rituals, which it is interesting, but it really takes the old model, trying to maybe force it or trying to reinstitute it in the kind of the urban setting. So the outside, the outdoors is still very, very strong in the articulation of how the community wants to live, while they live their living quarters out of the equation, which is an interesting thing. And this phenomena today really is what bothers me, or what really occupies me mostly, because I see this as a really a model that can be implemented, and I see it as the Y generation is rising, etc. I see this as a very vivid and vital model for the future. Thank you very much.